He forgets the day, he forgets the year, sometimes he forgets her name. But each morning as the light pours through the old maple leaves, he turns to her with trembling hands and asks, "May I have this dance?" She always smiles, and beside them, a little golden dog waits still patient like he remembers for them both. Then one day, something buried resurfaces. A letter. A vow. A truth too deep for time to erase. Stay with us, what you're about to witness is not just memory. It's love remembering itself. Maple Grove Retirement Home sat nestled beneath the misty ridgelines of western Oregon, where the red maples reached toward the sky like slow-burning flames. In early February, the place seemed frozen in time, quiet as an unwritten journal, with the occasional creak of a wheelchair, echoing like the soft ticking of a grandfather clock. In a modest ground-floor room that overlooked the dried winter garden, Harold and Rose Bennett began their morning like they had for over 60 years. Rose folded a burgundy scarf over her husband's shoulders, adjusting it with careful fingers, still nimble from decades of sewing. Cold morning, she murmured, her voice the same warmth he always remembered. Harold, dressed in his thick gray cardigan, tilted slightly in his chair, the kind of tilt that comes from years of leaning into the same body beside you. He glanced down at her hands with a small smile. "This heater sounds like an old steam engine falling apart," he grumbled. "You used to fix steam engines," she quipped, securing the last button he always forgot. Harold grinned. "Back then, I could also remember where I left my glasses." "You left them by the cactus lamp again," she said with a playful glance. "You're consistent if nothing else." The Bennetts had moved into Maple Grove 6 months earlier, not because they were abandoned or broken, but because growing older had started to make home feel risky. After Harold nearly caused a kitchen fire, forgetting the stove, Rose had simply taken his hand one evening and said, "Maybe it's time we go somewhere I won't have to worry when you forget, somewhere we can still be together." He had agreed, not with defeat, but with love. They had always said they'd go together, or not at all. Maple Grove was more than a care facility. It was the very place Harold had proposed in 1956, back when it was a quaint lakeside inn. Now, years later, they were returning not to finish their story, but to begin its gentlest chapter. That morning, as a fine rain tapped softly on the window, Harold shuffled toward the door. A soft, unfamiliar sound caught their ears, a faint scratching, then a low whimper. Rose opened the door, and there, soaked and shivering, stood a small golden retriever pup. Its coat was clumped with mud and rain, but its eyes shone like twin suns caught in a storm, bright, pleading, and calm. "Oh, my Rose," whispered, already kneeling. Harold hovered behind her. "Is it safe? Could be sick." But before he could step back, the dog leaned forward and pressed its damp head against Harold's shin. The old man froze. Then slowly his hand reached down, settling atop the pup's head like it belonged there. "Well, you've made a mistake, buddy," Harold murmured. "I'm not who you're looking for." But the dog didn't move, only looked up at him as if to say, "Yes, you are." Rose smiled. "Looks like he's found his person. He looks like a piece of sunshine that got lost in the rain," Harold mumbled. "Then we'll call him Sonny," she said without hesitation. By mid-afternoon, Sonny had already transformed the energy of the home. Normally quiet halls echoed with chuckles and soft gasps as the little dog trotted about, tail swaying like a metronome of joy. Ms. Margaret laughed as Sonny stole her slipper. Mr. Fred, who hadn't smiled since his wife passed, handed over a slice of ham from his breast pocket. Harold sat by the window, with Sonny curled under his feet. Rose stitched quietly nearby. The moment felt familiar and strange all at once, like remembering a dream after years of forgetting. "You know," Harold said softly, "he reminds me of Goldie." Rose looked up. "Our first dog." "Yeah. I haven't thought of her in years, but today when Sonny licked my hand, it was like I could see the backyard again. That rusty water dish. You in that yellow apron calling her in for dinner." Rose paused her needle. Harold rarely remembered such things now, but today something had stirred. "Maybe Sonny's not just helping you remember," she whispered. "Maybe he remembers for you." That night when the overnight nurse peeked in, she found Harold asleep in his armchair, one hand resting on Sonny's back. The dog lay still, chest rising and falling, slowly like he'd always belonged there. Rose tucked a soft quilt over both of them, then resumed her embroidery by the dim golden light of the desk lamp. In a place meant for endings, something had quietly begun, Not with a bang, but with a wet nose, a paw print, and a gentle reminder that love never forgets the way home. The days at Maple Grove Retirement Home had a rhythm slow and mellow, like the vinyl jazz records spinning in the common room. Morning light streamed through the windows in long golden beams, catching on the floating dust motes and the pale lace curtains Rose had sewn by hand 2 months ago. Outside in the communal garden, the early blooms of daffodils nodded lazily to a passing breeze. Inside, room 107, Harold Bennett was seated on a cushioned armchair near the window, staring intently at Sonny. The small golden retriever sat upright before him, tail wagging slowly, his golden coat catching the morning light like a halo. Sonny tilted his head left and right, mirroring Harold's slow nods, as if waiting for a cue. You know, Harold said, his voice gravelly but bright. Our wedding was on a Wednesday, rain in the morning, sunshine by noon. We were late to the church because the tires on that old Chevy blew out halfway down 3rd Street. Rose, seated nearby with her knitting needles, paused mid-stitch, glanced up, surprised. You remember that? She asked gently. Harold nodded, not taking his eyes off Sonny. Clear as yesterday. And the way your veil stuck to your lipstick when you leaned in to whisper, "Let's run now before we change our minds." He chuckled. It wasn't every day that Harold remembered the past so clearly. In fact, most mornings were foggy. His face sometimes blank when she said good morning, or a look of childlike confusion when asked where he had placed his glasses. But there was something about Sonny, perhaps the way he rested his chin on Harold's lap, or the warm, earthy scent of his fur that sparked something inside Harold's mind. Sarah, the head nurse at Maple Grove, had begun to notice too. Sarah was a tall, lean woman in her early 50s with cropped ash blonde hair and quick, perceptive eyes. She had worked at Maple Grove for nearly 2 decades and was known for her mix of stern efficiency and unexpected tenderness. After losing her younger brother to early-onset dementia, Sarah had developed a unique sensitivity to memory patients. Her demeanor often guarded, but her care precise and deeply intentional. You should record these stories, she suggested to Rose one afternoon, after seeing Harold recount his wedding day to a laughing group of residents by the bird feeder. Before they fade again, she added quietly. That night, Rose dug out her old handheld recorder from a box under the bed. The plastic was scuffed, the batteries dusty, but it worked. They started simply with Harold talking about how they first met in 1954 under the flickering lights of a bowling alley, where Rose had been beating her older brother's scores. He described the chipped red shoes she wore, the scent of vanilla from her lip balm, and how he'd fumbled his first line because Sonny, yes, the same name as their dog, now had been the name of the stray puppy that had run between their legs that night. Wait, Rose interrupted. Sonny. Harold blinked, confused. Yeah, that was his name? Golden Mutt. You took him in after. The coincidence was uncanny, and they both turned to look at the current, Sonny snoozing under the windowsill with his paws twitching in a dream. I think it's a sign, Rose whispered. Over the next week, they recorded every day. Mornings were best, Harold's mind sharper in the early hours. They documented the early years of their marriage, raising their only daughter, Emily, the way Harold built a wooden swing by hand for her 10th birthday. He even remembered the creak of the rope and the squeal of laughter from Emily that seemed to float through time and into the room. One afternoon, Sarah knocked gently on their door and peeked in. I've arranged something, she said, if you're up for it. She led them to the recreation room, where a small group of residents sat in a semicircle around a table with a microphone and a few cups of warm cider. Lena, the young activities coordinator, waved cheerfully. She was petite in her 20s, with curly auburn hair always tied up in a loose bun, and a contagious enthusiasm that filled every room she entered. She had recently begun a storytelling initiative at Maple Grove, inviting residents to share snippets of their life for a community podcast called Echoes of Us. Harold, hesitant at first, agreed, after Sonny nosed his knee encouragingly. That day he told the group about the time he proposed with a paper ring made from a diner napkin, and how Rose had kept it for 5 years before he could afford a real one. There were laughter and claps and even tears when Rose pulled out that very napkin laminated and kept in her wallet. Later that night, as they lay side by side in their twin beds pushed close together, Rose turned to Harold. You know, every time you remember, I fall in love again. He smiled sleepily. Then, let's keep remembering. Even if we have to borrow Sonny's memory. And so it went. Each morning, as the sun painted gold across the wooden floor, they recorded memories. Sonny. Their golden witness was always present, whether curling on Harold's feet or licking the mic in the middle of an emotional pause. Sarah took to calling Sonny the memory keeper. She even started bringing other residents to sit near him during her morning rounds, curious to see if his presence could spark more old stories. One day Harold reached for the recorder, eyes gleaming. "Did I ever tell you," he said, "about the first time I saw Emily hold a puppy? She was 4. Said it smelled like warm bread." Sonny barked once as if in agreement. The late morning sun slanted through the windows of room 107, painting the beige walls in warm amber stripes. Outside, a pair of finches fluttered across the maple tree, chirping above the quiet hum of lawnmowers and the clatter of Sarah's gardening tools in the courtyard. Inside, Rose stood beside the old walnut desk, holding a small time-worn tin box that Sonny had pawed out from beneath the bottom drawer. It wasn't the first time Sonny had nosed his way into hidden treasures. The little golden retriever, no more than a year old, with soft almond-shaped eyes and floppy ears that never seemed to stay still, had developed a knack for unearthing things that shouldn't have been forgotten. This morning, he'd barked once sharply and scratched the corner of the desk, until Rose knelt down beside him and found the small box wrapped in an elastic ribbon. She opened it slowly, expecting old receipts or postcards. But inside were rows of aged greeting cards, some yellowed at the edges, others creased and dog-eared, but all untouched. Her breath caught. She picked up the first card, decorated with tulips and an old-fashioned cursive font, "To my one and only, forever yours." The back had no stamp, no address, just a line in Harold's unmistakable slanted handwriting, "For Rose. I just didn't send it yet." There were over 20 cards, some dating back decades. Valentine's Day's anniversaries, random Tuesdays. Rose sat on the edge of the bed, her fingers trembling slightly, and began reading them aloud. Sonny jumped up beside her, curling next to her legs, like a silent confidant. His eyes, bright and alert, seemed to listen with the solemn dignity of someone holding a secret too sacred to bark about. When Harold returned from his morning stroll, Sarah had walked with him halfway to the koi pond, and back he saw Rose holding the cards. He paused, hands behind his back, and tilted his head. "You found them," he said simply. No panic, no surprise. "Why didn't you give them to me?" she asked, her voice more curious than hurt. Harold walked over slowly, one leg stiff from an old injury during his mechanic days. He sat down beside her and scratched behind Sonny's ear. "I didn't think I was interesting enough," he said after a pause. "I'd write them and then think, nah, Rose deserves better words. Someone who writes like poetry, not oil changes. So I'd tuck them away." Rose's eyes filled with tears, but she laughed softly. "Harold Bennett, you once told me. I had the kind of eyes that made parking lots look like gardens." "Well, that's true. Then what's more poetic than that?" She picked up another card and began to read aloud. "I saw you hanging laundry today, humming that tune again, something about summer kisses. I swear if I could bottle that moment, I'd carry it in my breast pocket for the rest of my life." Her voice trembled halfway through, but she kept reading one after another, as if casting spells back into the air. Sonny remained at their feet, his tail thudding against the carpet with each soft pause. Later that day, Rose brought the box to the activity room, where some residents were gathered for knitting club. She asked if she could share something. As she began to read the cards aloud, the room fell silent. Sarah looked up from arranging carnations, her eyes misting. "He wrote these and never gave them to you?" asked Martha, a spry widow with sharp eyes and a short gray pixie cut. "That's heartbreakingly sweet." Rose nodded, and every single one sounds like him, full of grease and hope. Within hours, word spread around Maple Grove. By evening, it wasn't Harold and Rose anymore. It was the Bennett love letters. Residents stopped them in the hall to ask about their favorite card. Lena made copies of some to hang on the bulletin board outside the library. One read, "Even if my memory fades, may my hands still remember yours." Inspired Toby. Yes, the same teenager who helped with bingo offered to create a Bennett wall in the dining room. He painted a mural of 2 clasped hands beneath a golden sky, and residents added their own love notes beneath it. Sonny's paw print dipped in gold ink appeared in the corner. Even Harold, reluctant at first, began to enjoy the attention. He joked that he'd finally become a published writer without a single rejection letter. In the midst of all the laughter and memories, Sonny became the unofficial guardian of the Bennett wall. He'd sit beside it during lunch, as if ensuring no one defaced the sanctity of love. Lena gave him a tiny paper cap labeled archivist, and everyone, even the shyest residents, began calling him Professor Sonny. But the sweetest moment came one night after lights out. Rose in her robe placed the last card back into the tin and turned to Harold, who was already snoring gently. She lay down beside him, kissed his forehead, and whispered, "You've always had the words. I just had to listen." Sonny curled at the foot of their bed, sighed contentedly. At Maple Grove, Friday evenings usually meant quiet tea, crossword puzzles, and the gentle hum of wheelchairs gliding down carpeted halls. But this one was different. The hallway buzzed with the sound of vintage jazz rehearsals, paper lanterns being unboxed, and residents gossiping like teenagers before prom. There was a flyer on the bulletin board that read, "Old Time Dance Night, where wrinkles waltz and hearts remember." The idea naturally had come from Sarah Elwood. Towering and composed, Sarah moved with the grace of a woman who once danced ballet and then forgot how until life pushed her to remember. Since losing her son, she had learned to channel her grief into beauty, offering moments of light to others instead of sitting in her own shadows. Sarah wore a slate blue dress that evening, one she hadn't touched since her wedding anniversary 6 years ago. Her long braid brushed the middle of her back, and her quiet voice had a rhythm like lullabies, always careful, never rushed. She stood near the record player, now adjusting the volume. "We'll start with Duke Ellington," she murmured to herself. Then Ella. Then maybe surprise them with Elvis. Lena zipped around the lounge, adjusting streamers and checking the chairs that formed a rough circle around the makeshift dance floor. She wore a black jumpsuit far too elegant for someone juggling balloons under her arm. Sonny trailed her like a golden echo, occasionally pouncing on a rogue streamer or nudging her leg as if approving the aesthetic. By 6 o'clock, the residents began filtering in. Some wore suits that hadn't seen daylight since the Reagan administration. Others arrived wrapped in shawls, corsages, pinned to cardigans. Sarah welcomed each by name, offering gentle compliments that didn't feel scripted. When Rose entered the room, actually paused. She wore a lavender tea-length dress with a scoop neckline, her hair in a careful updo. She'd taken 3 days to alter it by hand, her old 60th birthday dress refitted with new lace at the collar and a ribbon the color of moonlight. Harold followed beside her suit jacket slightly askew, but shoes gleaming. That shine had come courtesy of Sonny earlier that afternoon, when the pup had discovered the Polish tin and, in true overachiever fashion, helped by chewing the ends of the shoelaces. Harold hadn't minded. He's just softening him up for dancing, he'd said. The music began with slow swing, and couples began to sway. Some danced sitting down, just tapping their feet, or nodding to the rhythm. But Harold and Rose, holding hands, stepped into the center of the room with surprising poise. "Remember," Rose whispered, "follow the rhythm of my hands, not your feet." "I married you for your hands anyway," Harold replied, drawing a chuckle from Lena nearby. They moved with a gentle precision, Rose guiding slightly, Harold focused on her eyes. It was less a waltz and more a memory being replayed with new choreography. Each step was a vow, each spin a promise not to forget, even when forgetting felt inevitable. Sonny, meanwhile, sat at the edge of the floor, watching them like a judge at a ballroom contest. His tail thumped in time with the music. When the second song played, a soft ballad by Nat King Cole, Sonny could no longer resist. He bounded forward, dancing awkwardly in a circle near the couple. His paws slid across the polished floor, tongue-out ears flying. The room burst into laughter. "Guess we have a third partner," Harold said, stepping aside to give Sonny space. The dog bowed, then sat as if satisfied with his cameo. Toby, the teenage volunteer with wild curls and permanently grass-stained shoes, was manning the refreshment table. He'd been sneaking extra brownies to Ms. Margaret all evening, but paused to watch Harold and Rose. "They move like the music's inside them," he told Lena. Lena nodded. "It is. It's written in a language only they speak." Later that evening, after the dancing had slowed, and some residents dozed in their chairs, Sarah made her way to the microphone. "I've worked in a lot of places." She began, fingers wrapped around the mic like a lifeline, "but I've never seen a love like the one we witnessed tonight. Not just Harold and Rose, all of you. The way you hold each other up, sometimes literally, is the most honest kind of dance." She turned to Sonny, now curled on a pile of coats. "And some of us don't need words to say, 'I love you.' Some of us just show up, every step of the way." Applause rose like a gentle tide. Harold and Rose sat in the corner, hands still entwined. She leaned her head on his shoulder. "That was perfect," he whispered. "You always say that after you nearly step on my toes." "I mean it more every time." Sarah lowered the lights as the last record played, an instrumental lullaby Rose once played on vinyl every Sunday morning. The lanterns above them glowed soft gold, casting shadows like memories across the walls. One by one, residents were wheeled or walked back to their rooms, still swaying to phantom melodies. As Lena helped gather empty cups, she paused by Harold and Rose. "You two won dance couple of the night." Harold raised an eyebrow. "Is there a trophy?" "Only bragging rights," she grinned. Sonny stood up, trotted over, and laid his head on Harold's knee. "Can we split it 3 ways?" Harold asked. The sun that morning at Maple Grove had the golden clarity of a childhood memory, gentle, nostalgic, and almost too perfect to trust. Rose stood beneath the gazebo in the courtyard garden, tying a pastel bunting across its beam. She wore a wide-brimmed straw hat, a linen blouse tucked into pressed slacks, and her usual string of pale pearls that shimmered when she turned her head. Harold sat nearby in a foldable lawn chair, tracing the rim of a thermos, with his finger watching her like she was a page he'd read before but wanted to read again. It was Sarah's idea, of course. The new activities director, tall and slender, with a kind of natural poise that made her movements seem choreographed, even when she tripped over a garden hose, had suggested a picnic. Something unstructured, she said, like childhood, but with better sandwiches. Sarah had been different since her arrival, efficient but tender, always measuring her words like ingredients. Her past still shadowed her posture. The loss of her son, Eli, had left something permanent in her tone. But when she planned for the residents, she smiled more particularly around Harold and Rose. She said they reminded her of what still remained. By noon, the lawn was dotted with checkered blankets, umbrellas, picnic baskets, and collapsible chairs. Residents slowly gathered, led by Lena and a few cheerful volunteers from the local high school. Among them was Toby, a 17-year-old boy with untamed curly hair and a knack for making people laugh. He was lanky, often wore band t-shirts under his open flannel, and had a nervous energy like he didn't quite fit into his own limbs. He had started volunteering as community service, but stayed because Rose once told him he reminded her of her brother in the 1940s. That apparently meant everything. Harold and Rose claimed a quiet corner near the hydrangeas. Instead of just sitting, they had brought an old quilt and, with Sarah and Lena's help, erected a tiny tent using 2 folding chairs, a broom handle, and one of Rose's floral sheets. "It's just like we did on our honeymoon," Rose grinned, standing proudly with a clothespin in her mouth. Except, back then it was in the back of a rusted pickup truck during a thunderstorm. "You nearly stabbed me with an umbrella," Harold recalled. "You said you liked women with strong survival instincts." Sonny trotted back and forth, ears perked, tail wagging in big swoops. The now 11-month-old golden retriever had grown into a sturdy frame, though he still moved with the bounce of a much younger pup. His fur was thick and sunlit, his eyes always scanning. Every now and then, he'd sit directly in front of someone and stare until they either offered a snack or a story. More often than not, they gave both. The picnic unfolded slowly. Some residents dozed in the shade. Others shared memories between bites of egg salad and slices of lemon cake. Lena moved among them with a notebook, capturing quotes and laughter like butterflies. Sarah played quiet jazz from a Bluetooth speaker tucked inside an old wicker basket. Harold leaned into Rose and whispered something that made her blush, and Sonny rolled over dramatically, as if protesting their affection. Then came the digging. It started as a scratch light focused insistent. Sonny had wandered to a shady patch beneath the oldest elm tree in the garden. There, just beside one of the roots, he pawed at the dirt with sudden urgency. Rose noticed first. "What's he up to?" she asked, rising carefully. Toby, who had been tossing grapes into his own mouth, jogged over. Probably found a squirrel stash. But what Sonny unearthed wasn't acorns. It was a small dented tin box wrapped in a faded handkerchief and sealed shut with rusted edges. Rose gasped. Toby handed it to Harold with reverence, as if passing him a relic from a museum. "It's heavy," Harold said. "Might be gold. Or it's just peanut brittle gone very wrong." Inside, they found photographs browned by time, but still distinct young men in military uniforms, a sepia-toned picture of a woman with eyes like roses, and one photo Harold immediately held close, a group of 4 men sitting atop a tank, smiling, sunburned, and very much alive. "That's me," he murmured, pointing to the second from the left. "And that's Jimmy. Lord, I hadn't thought of him in 50 years. Folded beneath the photos was a letter. The paper was thin, the handwriting trembling, but familiar. Rose read it aloud. "Dear Rose, if I don't come back, I want you to have this. It isn't much, just stories and faces I didn't want forgotten. If I make it home, I'll bring it to you myself and pretend I had it all along. Yours, Harold. Silence fell around their blanket fort. Lena had stopped writing. Sarah's hand paused mid-reach for a cookie. Even Toby had gone still. You never gave it to me, Rose whispered. I must have buried it when I got home, Harold said softly. I think I didn't want to remember those parts. Sonny placed his paw gently on the corner of the letter. He didn't bark. He didn't move. He just stayed there still and solid. You remembered enough to keep it safe, Rose said, touching his hand. And Sonny remembered how to find it. Later, Lena tucked the letter and photos into a plastic sleeve and added it to the Golden Vows Project archives. She asked Harold if he wanted to include it in the published edition. Only if she gets credit, he said, nodding at Sonny. That dog's got better instincts than I do. As the sun began to dip and shadows lengthened across the garden, Rose lay back against a pillow. Harold stretched beside her. They stared at the quilt canopy above them. Think we could sleep out here tonight? Harold asked. Only if you don't snore. Sonny curled at their feet, guarding not just the couple, but the story that now had one more chapter. It began with the door left open. Just a little. Just enough. A nurse had come in to deliver Harold's medication left, to answer a phone call, and in that moment a crack of light, a breath of wind. Harold stepped out. He wasn't frightened. Not exactly. Just called by something deep in the fog of his mind. He walked down the hall in slippers, pajama buttons askew, past the TV lounge and the puzzle table, past Lena, who didn't see him at first, out through the garden gate that hadn't latched all the way, into the trees. Inside, Rose stirred her tea twice, then paused. Where's Harold? She asked too casually. He was just... Sonny lifted his head from under the table ears, high. In an instant he stood, a flash of gold, a silent streak toward the door. Rose's heart skipped. She didn't wait for staff. She followed the blur. Harold walked like he was chasing something, an old song, a scent, a younger version of himself. He didn't know, but the trees were familiar. The wind knew his name. His legs trembled but didn't stop. He paused near the largest tree in the outer courtyard, a gnarled maple with low branches and scars from decades of ice. He touched the bark. Your name, he mumbled. It was it, Eliza? No answer. His knees buckled. He sat hard on the earth palms, scraping the roots. And then warmth, a soft pressing nose beneath his elbow. Sonny. Harold blinked. Did I lose something? Sonny whimpered, then sat beside him, pressing his side to Harold's ribs, grounding him. You're not Eliza? Sonny tilted his head. You're mine. Harold touched his soft ears. You're Sonny. The breeze shifted. Something loosened. A knot inside his chest gave way. Footsteps approached, then rose. Breathless, tears blooming at the corners of her eyes. Harold. Oh, love. I went looking, he whispered, but I forgot what for. Rose knelt, touched his face. You came to the tree. What tree? She pointed. This is where you asked me to marry you. He stared up at the maple, crooked, enduring, still standing. I did. Rose nodded, tears streaking her cheeks. You carved our initials right there. Look. He squinted. And there it was. A weathered H+R, barely visible under the moss. Sonny brought me here, he said, his voice cracking. He knew. Staff rushed out with blankets and warm water, worried and apologetic. But neither Harold nor Rose seemed shaken anymore. They sat under that tree until sunset. Lena brought a chair and a cup of cocoa, and later joined them with a quiet camera click. But mostly she just watched. Sonny stayed at Harold's feet every so often, looking up, not for command or praise, but simply to confirm he's still here. He's still home. That night back in their room, Rose tucked Harold in. He was tired, a little shaken, but smiling. You scared me, she whispered. I scared myself, he replied. But the funny thing is, I didn't feel lost. I felt like I was being led somewhere important. She glanced down at Sonny, curled at the foot of the bed like a sentinel. You were. Later, as they drifted to sleep, Harold murmured, Do you think dogs remember love? Rose didn't answer right away. She simply watched Sonny, his slow, peaceful breath rising and falling with the quiet rhythm of a soul that had done its work well. Then she whispered, No love, I think, they never forget. It began with a clipboard, a dry erase calendar, and Lena's quiet determination. Spring had given Maple Grove a second wind, warm sun, budding flowers, and something gentler in the air. Lena stood at the reception desk, tapping a marker against her lip, her wide brown eyes thoughtful beneath the untamed curls tucked into a messy bun. After months of working on the residence book project, she wanted to offer something different, not just reflection, but return, something tactile, something real. She called it the memory ride. Her idea was simple: rent a small shuttle-take residence on personalized outings to the places that once made them feel like themselves. Not hospital visits or routine errands, but actual memory anchors. The lake where someone kissed their spouse for the first time. The ice cream parlor that used to play Elvis. The old train station that no longer had tracks, but still had the ghost of farewell in its bones. The list filled faster than she expected. And at the very top, written in Rose's tidy cursive, St. Mary's Chapel, 9 a.m. wedding, October 3rd, 1957. Lena smiled, then added another name under essential passenger Sonny. The shuttle arrived Saturday morning. It was small, white, a little dented, and driven by Mr. Dwayne Carter, a retired fireman with silver buzz-cut wide shoulders and an eternal coffee thermos clutched in one hand. At 68, Dwayne had volunteered for the job because, as he said, "I like stories better than silence." He wore a navy windbreaker and khakis, and his smile had a permanent slant, probably from years of pulling others out of burning rooms, and now metaphorically bringing memories back to life. Lena climbed aboard, first clipboard in hand. "You ready, Captain?" "I was born ready," he said, tapping the gas with the soft grace of someone who'd once driven fire trucks in reverse at full speed. Harold and Rose came next. Rose in a lavender shawl and pale cream gloves, her silver hair pinned back in soft waves. Harold wore his gray cardigan buttoned to the top, and a navy tie he didn't remember how to knot. Lena had helped him. His fingers trembled slightly, but he stood tall. Sonny leapt into the shuttle beside him, tail wagging, as if he already knew where they were going. The ride was mostly quiet, filled with scenery that shifted slowly, highways folding into narrow roads, then small-town storefronts dressed in weathered paint and spring banners. As they neared the edge of town, Harold pressed his hand to the glass. "I know this turn," he murmured. Rose squeezed his other hand. "We came this way in the back seat of your uncle's car, and the tire went flat," he added, suddenly eyes bright for a moment. "We had to hitch a ride with a florist in a pickup. You held a bouquet of petunias in your lap the whole way." Sonny, resting between their feet, gave a soft exhale. The past was rising, blooming between them, like the trees lining the road. St. Mary's Chapel sat at the top of a small hill, white wood with blue trim, its bell tower slightly crooked as if bowing toward time. The front steps were cracked, but the door remained painted fresh, and the stained glass still threw kaleidoscopes of color onto the floorboards. Rose gasped when she stepped out. "It's smaller than I remember." Lena walked beside her. "Everything is when you've grown." Harold looked up at the chapel and blinked slowly. "I can hear the organ," he said, though there was no music. Inside, the air smelled of dust and old wood polish. A volunteer caretaker, Mrs. Dottie Lynn, had unlocked the chapel that morning. She was in her 70s, short and round, with a lilac cardigan, and eyes that smiled even when her mouth didn't. She'd grown up attending weddings here and had recently returned as a part-time caretaker. She offered them a quiet nod, then vanished into the back pew, allowing them space. Rose and Harold walked slowly down the center aisle. Sonny followed, each paw step a soft thud on the worn planks. At the altar, they stopped. "This is where you said you'd never leave," Rose whispered. "I did," Harold asked, brows knit. "You said you didn't know what the world would be like, but you wanted to face it, holding my hand." He looked down. Their fingers were already entwined. Sonny lay down beside them, his head resting on Harold's shoe, eyes closed, as if even now he was guarding something sacred. Lena, watching from the last pew, wiped at her eyes. Then she stood and quietly stepped forward. "Would you like to renew your vows?" she asked. Rose looked startled. Harold tilted his head but smiled. I don't remember the first ones," he said. "That's okay," Lena said. "You can make new ones." Mrs. Dottie returned with a small silk pillow someone had left in the back closet years ago. On it, she placed 2 silver rings, plain, simple, mismatched in size. Probably old donations or forgotten treasures. They would do just fine. The ceremony was brief, no grand declarations, no audience except Lena, Mrs. Dottie, and the birds outside. Harold looked at Rose and said, "I promise to love you again, every time I remember, and even when I don't." Rose's voice shaking said, and I promise to remind you not just with words, but with tea, and music, and the warmth of a hand that never lets go." Dottie whispered amen. Sonny barked once, tail wagging. On the ride home, Harold leaned against Rose's shoulder. He didn't say much, but he kept the borrowed ring on his pinky finger and tapped it gently like a man checking the beat of a song he hadn't sung in a while. Dwayne played an old jazz station on the radio. Lena dozed with her clipboard in her lap. Sonny lay curled beneath the back row chest, rising and falling in perfect rhythm, with the wheels humming along the road. Back at Maple Grove, as the shuttle doors opened, Harold looked around. "Is this home?" Rose kissed his cheek. "It is now." The idea came on a rainy Tuesday when Lena sat watching water trail down the windows of the activity room, like threads unraveling from the clouds. She'd been keeping notes for weeks, small interviews, photographs, sketches, and now flipping through her journal, she realized she had more than fragments. She had stories, whole lives layered and luminous. Lena, 22, a slender girl with short curly black hair and oversized cardigans that always hung past her fingertips, had a warmth that never felt forced. People told her secrets without realizing they had spoken. She listened like it mattered, and it did. Her time at Maple Grove had started as a college internship, but somewhere along the way, these stories had stopped being work and started feeling like inheritance. That morning, she approached Rose with a folder. "I've been working on a memory project," Lena said, placing the folder gently on the table. "A book. Well, a kind of book. It's called Golden Vows, and it starts with you and Harold." Rose's hands trembled slightly as she opened the folder. Inside were printouts photos of her and Harold dancing under the garden lights, Harold's handwritten notes from his letter for tomorrow, Sonny napping on Harold's slippers, and a scan of the very first postcard Harold ever sent her from a train depot in Kansas in 1957. Lena Rose whispered, blinking back tears. "You remembered more than I ever expected anyone to." Lena smiled. "I just wrote down what you already lived." They began working together each morning after breakfast. Harold, when lucid, contributed stories and fragments, how he proposed with a ring tied to a dog collar, how Rose once stitched him a shirt that made every man at the factory jealous. He'd start one sentence and lose it halfway, but Rose would finish it like a duet they had rehearsed for decades. Lena recorded it all. Sonny became the unofficial editor. He lay across Lena's feet, occasionally standing to bark if someone tried to sneak away from a story too early. One day when Ms. Callahan, sharp-witted and once a professional storyteller herself, hesitated to share an old heartbreak, Sonny climbed onto the bench beside her and placed a paw on her knee. She began speaking without realizing she'd started. Inspired by Harold and Rose, other residents began adding their chapters. Some included war medals, others recipes. One had a poem scribbled in the margins of a crossword puzzle. The lounge was soon filled with the scratch of pens, the scent of old paper, and a low buzz of rediscovery. To support the project, a new volunteer joined the scene, Eli Martinez, a 30-year-old graphic designer with faded tattoos on his forearms and a quiet demeanor. He wore round glasses and rode a squeaky bike that always left a trail of leaves behind. Eli had grown up with his grandmother, and after her passing began volunteering at nursing homes on weekends. His patience was remarkable. He once waited 2 full hours for Mr. Fred to describe a single photo of his late wife. Eli scanned old photographs, retouched damaged edges, and designed layouts with the care of a historian preserving gold. As the book took shape, Lena reached out to a small independent publisher in Portland. She didn't expect a reply. But one rainy Friday, an envelope arrived. Inside was a handwritten note. "We cried, we smiled, we want to print it." Attached was a modest offer to publish a trial run of 100 copies. When Lena told the residents, the room erupted not with shouts, but with a kind of reverent silence, then applause that felt like thunder in a cathedral. At the center of it all were Harold and Rose. They chose the cover image themselves, a photo Lena had taken at sunset, Rose seated on a garden bench, Harold standing beside her with one hand on her shoulder, and Sonny in the middle, ears perked, mouth slightly open in what looked like a smile. On the day the first copies arrived, everyone gathered in the lounge. A small table was set with lemonade and cookies, and Sarah Elwood, the activities director, with her tall, graceful frame and ever-practical braid, read aloud the dedication from the first page. "To those who remember and those who forget but love anyway." Harold held the book in both hands like it might fly away. Rose whispered, "You look proud." "I am," he replied, "even if I don't always remember what for." Sarah handed a copy to Sunny, mock formal, for services to literature companionship and the occasional interruption of scheduled events. Sunny barked once solemnly and then laid his paw across the book. That evening, Rose read the first chapter aloud to Harold by lamplight. He followed along for a while, then drifted. But when she reached the part where he'd written, "You are my second heartbeat," he stirred. "That's good," he said sleepily. "Did I write that?" "You did. I must have meant it." She kissed his forehead. "You still do." Sunny, lying nearby, lifted his head briefly, then rested it back on his paws, satisfied. They didn't sell many copies. That wasn't the point. What mattered was the shelf near the front lobby where Golden Vase sat, with its cream-colored spine, nestled between a chess set and a pot of yellow tulips. Visitors often picked it up, thumbed through the pages, and forgot what they came to complain about. Because sometimes what matters most isn't how many remember your story. It's simply that it was told, fully, faithfully, and like all vows worth making, told with love. The spring air at Maple Grove had taken on a honeyed softness, the kind that made old bones feel slightly less brittle, and hearts, if not minds, feel light again. Outside, daffodils bloomed in careful rows, and birds returned with songs that sounded vaguely like childhood. Inside room 102, Harold Bennett woke up before the sun had fully claimed the sky. His hands fumbled briefly with the edge of the blanket. He stared at the room, familiar yet vague, like a place he had once dreamt of, but couldn't quite name. Then he saw her. "May I have this dance?" he asked, his voice cracked by sleep but tinged with a boyish charm. Rose turned from the window where she'd been tying back the curtains. She smiled, not surprised. "Only if you still remember the steps." Harold chuckled, though there was no music, no floor but the fading wood beneath their slippers. Still he stood, and she took his hand. Sunny, always nearby, rose from his spot beside the dresser, stretched once and followed, like a quiet witness returning to his post. Each day began this way now. No calendars, no clocks. Just a man, a woman, and a dog rehearsing a promise they never stopped keeping. As Harold's memory loosened like the seams of an old jacket, the rest of the world leaned in to hold him together. One afternoon, Maple Grove welcomed a new activities director, Sarah Elwood, a woman in her early 40s with a gentle voice and a slow, deliberate walk that suggested she had once moved through life faster than it allowed. Tall and willowy, with a cascade of dark red hair pulled into a no-nonsense braid, Sarah carried a clipboard like armor. She had once been a kindergarten teacher, but after a personal tragedy, the loss of her only son to illness, she left the school system unable to face empty desks. Working with seniors, she once told Lena, felt like learning to hope backwards. Sarah met Harold and Rose on her first Thursday. She watched as Harold forgot her name 3 times, but still asked her to waltz. She said yes. She always said yes. Rose, curious, noticed Sarah rarely smiled, though her voice was kind. Over time, they began having tea together in the afternoons. It became clear Sarah loved music, not just the melody, but the structure, the order. She once confessed, "I like knowing what comes next." With my son, I never got to finish the song. It was Sunny who finally coaxed a real laugh out of her. One afternoon, while Sarah tried organizing a craft session, Sunny leapt onto the stage platform and snatched a paper garland she had been arranging. He darted through the lounge like a golden thief, trailing bright purple tulips behind him. Sarah chased him once, then twice, before surrendering to laughter so pure and unexpected it made Lena drop her clipboard in surprise. "You," Sarah whispered to Sunny, "are trouble." Sunny wagged his tail, rolled over, and barked once, as if to say, "You're welcome." Later that week, Sarah proposed an idea to the residents and staff, a living memory garden behind the main building. Instead of flowers alone, they would plant symbol stories, 1 tree per couple, or a resident with a stone bearing a quote or phrase that mattered. Rose immediately knew what she wanted their stone to say. "Love doesn't vanish, it dances." They chose a cherry tree. It would bloom like Harold's best days, soft, brilliant, brief, but unforgettable. On the morning the tree was planted, Harold had a harder time. He woke up unsure where he was, mistook Lena for his sister, and called Sunny Scout the name of a long-gone childhood pet. Rose held his hand and didn't correct him. She just said, "You're here," and that's enough. The whole community gathered around the garden. Sarah read a poem. Sunny sat beside Harold as Rose whispered each line to his ear. As the last words were spoken, Harold turned to Rose with tears in his eyes. "Did I ever marry you?" he asked. Rose smiled, "Every day." And then, as if the sunlight reached through the fog, he leaned close and whispered, May, I have this dance. She stood, took his hand. No music again. But who needed it? The garden watched, Sunny curled beside the new tree eyes, half-lidded tail resting on the fresh grass like a comma at the end of a sentence. That night Sarah stayed a little longer at Maple Grove. She played piano in the corner of the lounge, nothing flashy, just soft chords that wandered gently. Sunny lay at her feet, one paw occasionally tapping to the rhythm. Rose stitched quietly by the window. Harold, half asleep, murmured lines of old poems to no one in particular. It wasn't a grand ending. No revelations, no final goodbyes. Just another evening where vows were kept, not in words, but in gestures, in glances, in remembering even just for a moment that love had been real. Sometimes love doesn't need grand gestures or perfect memories. It just needs to show up every morning in small ways with patience and presence. In a world that forgets so quickly, may we all learn to remember what truly matters: kindness, loyalty, and the quiet vow to never stop caring. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who still believes in love that lasts. Leave a comment below. What's one silent promise you've kept for someone you love? And don't forget to subscribe for more real stories that stay with you long after the screen fades.